The ink on the divorce decree hadn't even dried when Patrick Sterling capped his pen, a smug grin plastered across his face. He looked at his wife, Victoria, trembling on the other side of the mahogany table, and saw only a defeated woman. He had the prenup, he had the company, and in an hour he'd have his mistress on a flight to the Maldives. He thought he had committed the perfect robbery under the guise of a marriage dissolution. But he forgot one thing. Victoria's late father, William, had a reputation for playing the long game. And when Judge Halloway broke the silence, not with a gavel, but with the crack of a sealed, red wax envelope, Patrick's smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. The air in the courtroom tasted stale, recycled through vents that hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. It smelled of floor wax and desperation. For Patrick Sterling, however, it smelled like victory. He sat on the left side of the aisle, his posture relaxed, bordering on insolent. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, shooting a glance at his reflection in the polished surface of the table. Not a hair out of place, he checked his Rolex. 10:15 a.m. If the judge hurried up, he could make the 1 p.m. flight out of JFK. Across the aisle, Victoria sat with her hands folded tight in her lap. Her knuckles were white. She wore a simple grey dress, looking every bit the grieving daughter and the soon-to-be ex-wife she was. She kept her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood, refusing to look at the man who had spent the last 5 years systematically dismantling her self-esteem and her bank account. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Halloway said, his voice a gravelly baritone that echoed off the high ceilings. "You understand that by signing this decree, the dissolution of marriage is final. There is no cooling-off period in this state for cases of this magnitude." Patrick didn't hesitate. He reached for the heavy fountain pen provided by his attorney, a shark of a man named Nathaniel Reed. The pen scratched loudly against the paper. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," Patrick said, his voice smooth. He signed his name with a flourish, a signature he had practiced since he was a nobody, trying to hustle his way into the Sterling family empire. He slid the papers across the table toward the clerk, the friction of the paper sounding like a hiss. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. He looked at Victoria. He didn't just look. He inspected her, like one inspects a car they are trading in for a newer model. His lips curled upward. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smirk of conquest. He had secured the controlling interest in Sterling Logistics. He had hidden the assets in shell companies in the Caymans, accounts Victoria's forensic accountants hadn't even sniffed. "And you, Mrs. Sterling?" the judge asked, turning his gaze to Victoria. Victoria picked up the pen. Her hand shook, just slightly. A single tremor. She signed. Victoria Ann Sterling. "Done," Nathaniel Reed whispered to Patrick, closing his briefcase with a snap. "The company is yours. The alimony is capped. We won." Patrick chuckled, a low sound in his throat. "I never doubted it, Nate. The old man is dead, and his daughter is too weak to fight." He started to stand up. He was already mentally checking out of the room. He was picturing the white sands, the blue water, and Tiffany waiting for him at the airport bar with 2 martinis. "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge's voice boomed. Patrick paused, hovering halfway out of his chair. He frowned, confused. "Your Honor, the papers are signed. We're done here." I said, "Sit down." The tone wasn't administrative anymore. It was commanding. Patrick slowly lowered himself back into the leather chair. He looked at Nathaniel, who shrugged, his eyebrows knitting together. Judge Halloway wasn't looking at the divorce papers. He was looking at the court bailiff, who had just entered from the judge's chambers. The bailiff, a burly man with a stone face, carried a thick metallic lockbox. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish. "The court acknowledges the dissolution of the marriage," Judge Holloway said, his eyes scanning a document the bailiff had placed on top of the lockbox. "However, the court also acknowledges that this proceeding triggers a specific, previously sealed conditional instrument." Patrick laughed nervously. "Conditional instrument? What is this?" "We have a prenup. It's ironclad." "This does not concern your prenuptial agreement, Mr. Sterling," the judge said. He put on a pair of reading glasses, the lenses catching the overhead light. "This concerns the last will and testament of William Sterling, specifically the Fidelity and Dissolution Codicil." Patrick's smirk faltered for the first time. "William's will was probated 2 years ago. This is nonsense." "The will that was probated," the judge corrected, "was the public will. This," he tapped the lockbox, "is the holographic will entrusted to the State Archives to be opened only in the event that Victoria Sterling filed for divorce, or—" The judge looked directly at Patrick. "Was divorced by her spouse." Patrick felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. He looked at Victoria. She wasn't looking at the table anymore. She was looking at him, and for the first time in years, her eyes weren't filled with tears. They were filled with ice. Nathaniel Reed stood up, his face flushing red. "Objection! This is highly irregular. You cannot introduce new testamentary evidence after the probate period has closed. My client has rights." "Sit down, counselor, or I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin," Judge Holloway snapped. "This court has broad discretion when fraud or bad faith is alleged in the context of family estates, and William Sterling was a very thorough man." The judge produced a small, silver key from an envelope attached to the file. He inserted it into the lockbox. Click. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Patrick gripped the arms of his chair. His knuckles were white. He knew William Sterling hated him. The old man had looked at Patrick like he was a parasite from the day they met. But William was dead. Dead men couldn't stop him. Dead men couldn't enforce rules. Judge Holloway lifted the lid and pulled out a document bound in blue leather. He opened it. The paper was old, slightly yellowed at the edges. "I will read the relevant section," the judge announced. "I, William Arthur Sterling, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish this contingency regarding the disposition of the Sterling logistics empire and the personal assets of my daughter, Victoria." The judge paused, looking over his glasses. "I have long suspected that Patrick Sterling does not love my daughter, but rather loves the portfolio she represents. I have watched him. I have seen the way he looks at the inventory spreadsheets with more lust than he has ever shown his wife." A ripple of murmurs went through the few spectators in the back. Patrick's jaw tightened. "This is slander," he hissed. The judge continued, ignoring him. "Therefore, let it be known, the transfer of shares to Patrick Sterling upon my death was a conditional trust, not an absolute gift. It was a test of character." Patrick's heart hammered against his ribs. Conditional trust? No. The shares were in his name. He had voted with them at the last board meeting. Clause 4, Section A. Should the marriage between my daughter and Patrick Sterling endure for 10 years with no infidelity, the shares shall become his permanently. However, the judge turned the page slowly. The sound of the paper turning was agonizing. Should the marriage end in divorce within 10 years, regardless of who files, or should proof of infidelity come to light prior to the 10-year mark, the Sterling Trap Clause is immediately activated. "The Sterling Trap?" Nathaniel whispered, horrified. "I've heard rumors of that. I thought it was a legal urban legend." "What does it mean?" Patrick demanded, his voice rising. "What does it mean?" "It means," the judge read, "that the ownership of the shares is retroactive. If the marriage fails, Patrick Sterling is deemed to have never owned the shares at all. He is classified, retroactively, as a temporary steward." The judge looked up. "And here is the kicker, Mr. Sterling. Listen closely. As a temporary steward, any profits, bonuses, or dividends extracted from the company during his tenure are considered loans, high-interest loans, callable immediately upon the signing of divorce papers." Patrick felt the blood drain from his face. He had stripped the company of nearly $50 million in bonuses over the last 3 years. He had spent it on cars, the villa in Tuscany, and on Tiffany. That's impossible," Patrick stammered. "I spent that money. It's gone. It's my money." "Not according to this," Judge Holloway said calmly. "And since you just signed the divorce papers 5 minutes ago, you officially triggered the repayment clause. You currently owe the estate of William Sterling, roughly." The judge consulted a secondary sheet of paper. $52 million, plus interest. Victoria finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the room. "You signed the papers, Patrick," she said. "You wanted to be free. Now you are." Patrick stood up, knocking his chair over. "I rescind my signature. I didn't know. This is entrapment." "The signature is witnessed and filed," the judge said, signaling the bailiff. "But we aren't done yet. The will has a second part. It mentions a specific beneficiary named Tiffany Rose." Patrick froze. He stopped breathing. The mention of Tiffany's name sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. Patrick's eyes darted to the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. How could the old man know about Tiffany? William had died 2 years ago. Patrick hadn't even met Tiffany until 6 months after the funeral. Unless he had been watched. "Tiffany Rose," Judge Holloway repeated, looking at a new document pulled from the blue binder. "Is she present?" Nathaniel Reed leaned in, whispering frantically to Patrick. "Tell me you didn't bring her here. Tell me you aren't that stupid." Patrick shook his head violently. "No. She's at the airport. She's waiting for the text to board." "She is not present, Your Honor," Nathaniel announced. "A pity," the judge said, "because according to the addendum filed by the estate's private investigators, dated just 3 days ago, Ms. Rose is currently listed as the co-signer on several offshore accounts that Mr. Sterling failed to disclose in his financial affidavit." The judge picked up a glossy photograph from the file and held it up. It was grainy, taken with a telephoto lens, but unmistakably clear. It showed Patrick and Tiffany on a yacht. Patrick was handing her a black briefcase. "This photo was taken last Tuesday," the judge said. "In international waters. You claimed to be at a dental conference in Chicago, Mr. Sterling." Patrick sank back into his chair, or rather, he collapsed into it. The bailiff righted the chair for him, his face impassive. "Perjury," Nathaniel muttered, closing his eyes. "We are looking at perjury charges now." "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You tried to hide assets during a divorce proceeding. That is a felony. But William Sterling's will provides a solution to keep you out of jail, provided you agree to the terms right now." Patrick looked up, hope sparking in his panicked eyes. "I'll agree, whatever it is. I don't want to go to jail." "The will states," the judge read, "if Patrick is caught hiding assets, he may avoid criminal prosecution by the estate if he immediately transfers all hidden assets, including those in Ms. Rose's name, back to Victoria Sterling. Furthermore, he must surrender his personal passport until the debt of $52 million is repaid. "I can't transfer what's in her name," Patrick cried. "She has the codes. She's the only one who can access the Cayman accounts." "Then I suggest you call her," Victoria said. She pulled a phone out of her purse and slid it across the table. "Put it on speaker." Patrick looked at the phone like it was a bomb. If he called Tiffany and told her the money was gone, that the game was up, he knew exactly what would happen. "Call her," Judge Holloway ordered, "or I issue a warrant for your arrest right now." Patrick's hand shook violently as he dialed the number. It rang once, twice. "Baby!" Tiffany's voice chirped through the speaker, loud and clear. "Did you sign the papers? Are we rich?" Patrick closed his eyes. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "Tiffany," Patrick croaked. Something happened." "What?" Her tone sharpened instantly. "What happened? You signed, right? Tell me you signed." "I signed," Patrick said. "But the money, the shares, they're gone, Tiff. It's a trap. The old man set a trap." There was a pause on the line. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, I owe the estate $50 million. I need you to wire the money back from the Cayman account, just to pay the debt, so I don't go to jail." The silence on the other end stretched for 5 seconds. Then a cold laugh echoed through the courtroom. "You idiot," Tiffany said. "Tiffany, please," Patrick begged, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm in court. The judge is listening." "Good," Tiffany said. "Let him listen. You think I stuck around with you because I liked your personality? You're arrogant and boring, Patrick. I stayed for the payout." "Tiffany, the money is in my name, Patrick," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You put it there to hide it from your wife, which means legally, it's mine. Thanks for the donation. I'm boarding the plane alone." Click. The line went dead. Patrick stared at the phone. He looked at the judge. He looked at Nathaniel, who was already packing his briefcase. "I'm resigning as your counsel," Nathaniel said, standing up. "My retainer doesn't cover being an accomplice to fraud. You're on your own." Patrick was alone. Truly alone. He looked at Victoria. She hadn't smiled. She hadn't laughed. She just looked tired. "Why?" Patrick whispered to her. "Why did you let me sign? You knew." "I gave you a choice, Patrick," Victoria said softly. "Last night, I asked you if you wanted to try marriage counseling one last time. I asked you if you wanted to make this work. If you had said yes, if you had shown 1 ounce of regret, I would have burned that will myself." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "But you smirked," she said. "You just smirked?" Patrick sat frozen, the dial tone of the disconnected call echoing in his mind long after the phone had gone dark. He looked around the courtroom. It felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in physically. The bailiff had moved closer, standing directly behind his chair, a silent sentinel ensuring he didn't bolt for the door. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Holloway broke the silence. "Since your former counsel has departed, and your accomplice has, to put it colloquially, left you holding the bag, we must proceed with the enforcement of the Sterling Trap Clause." I have rights," Patrick mumbled, but the arrogance was gone. He sounded like a child. "I need time to find a new lawyer." "You had a lawyer," the judge said unsympathetically. "You lied to him. That is not the court's problem. Now, regarding the debt." The judge turned back to the lockbox. He reached in and pulled out a small, black flash drive. "Victoria," the judge nodded to her. "Your father left this for you. He instructed that it be played only after the traitor, his words, had been exposed." Victoria walked toward the bench. "I didn't know about this part, Your Honor." Neither did the executors until this morning, Holloway said. He handed the drive to the court clerk, who plugged it into the stenographer's laptop. A moment later, a large screen on the wall flickered to life. The image was grainy, clearly recorded from a hidden camera inside an office. Patrick recognized the room immediately. It was William Sterling's private study. The date stamp in the corner read 3 years ago, 2 weeks before William died. On the screen, William sat in his high-backed leather chair. He looked frail, oxygen tubes in his nose, but his eyes were sharp. Sitting across from him was Patrick. Patrick gasped. He remembered this meeting. He had thought it was a private. On the screen, "Patrick," William wheezed, "I'm dying. You know that." "Don't talk like that, William," the on-screen Patrick said. His voice lacked any genuine empathy. He was checking his watch, the same watch he wore in court today. "I need to know," William said. "Will you take care of her, Victoria? When I'm gone, she'll be lost. She loves you so much." On the screen, Patrick leaned forward. A cruel smile played on his lips. "Listen, old man, let's cut the act. Victoria is a bore. She's weak. The only reason I'm here is this house, the company, and the legacy. Once you're in the ground, I'm running things my way. I'll keep her around as a trophy, maybe, but don't expect me to play the doting husband forever." The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. William, on the screen, nodded slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. "I see. You are exactly who I thought you were." "I'm the future," Patrick sneered on screen. "Your history." William reached under his desk. "Then I suppose I have my answer." The video cut to black. In the courtroom, Patrick's face was the color of ash. He remembered saying those words. He had felt so powerful then, bullying a dying man. He didn't know the cameras were rolling. "He gave you a chance, too," Victoria said, her voice shaking with emotion. "He asked you to your face, and you told him you were going to use me." I was angry," Patrick stammered. "It was just talk." "It was a confession," Judge Holloway ruled, "and it cements the validity of the fidelity clause. You admitted your intent to defraud the marriage for financial gain before the testator even died." The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. The court orders the immediate freezing of all remaining assets in Patrick Sterling's name. The court grants a summary judgment in favor of the estate for the sum of $52 million. Mr. Sterling, you are to be remanded into custody until a forensic audit determines exactly how much you stole, and if you can pay bail." "Custody!" Patrick shrieked. He stood up, knocking the chair over again. "You can't arrest me for debt. This is America." "I'm not arresting you for debt," the judge said, taking off his glasses. "I'm arresting you for the embezzlement of company funds that, as of 10 minutes ago, you never legally owned. That is theft, Mr. Sterling. Grand larceny." The bailiff moved. He didn't ask Patrick to put his hands behind his back. He grabbed Patrick's wrists and spun him around. The cold click of handcuffs was louder than the pen scratch had been. "Victoria!" Patrick yelled, struggling as the bailiff marched him toward the side door leading to the holding cells. "Victoria, tell them we can work this out. I love you. I always loved you." Victoria stood still. She watched the man she had married, the man she had cried over, the man she had tried so hard to please. She looked at his desperate, sweating face. "Goodbye, Patrick," she said. The door slammed shut. The heavy steel door of the holding cell clanged shut, the sound reverberating through Patrick Sterling's skull like a physical blow. He stood in the center of the small, grey room, still wearing his $3,000 suit, which now seemed ridiculously out of place against the graffitied cinder block walls. He stared at the small, scratched metal toilet in the corner. He looked at the wooden bench that smelled of bleach and sweat. Minutes ago, he was a multi-millionaire. He was the king of the logistics world. He was a free man about to sip champagne on a private jet. Now, he was inmate number 4920. He paced the length of the cell. 3 steps, turn. 3 steps, turn. "This is a mistake," he muttered to the empty air. "It's a mistake. Nate will fix it. Or someone." But Nathaniel Reed had walked away. And Tiffany. Patrick stopped pacing. The memory of Tiffany's laugh over the phone speaker burned in his chest. She had played him. The realization hit him harder than the handcuffs. He hadn't just lost the money. He had been the mark. He, Patrick Sterling, the man who prided himself on being the smartest person in the room, was the victim of a con. He slumped onto the bench, burying his face in his hands. He didn't cry. He was too in shock to cry. He just sat there, listening to the distant shouting of other prisoners, waiting for a lawyer who wasn't coming. Meanwhile, 5 miles away, Victoria Sterling stepped out of the courthouse. The sun was blinding. A swarm of reporters had gathered at the bottom of the steps, their cameras clicking like a chorus of mechanical crickets. Usually, Victoria would have shied away. She would have let Patrick shield her, let him do the talking while she shrank into his shadow. But today, the shadow was gone. She adjusted her sunglasses and walked down the steps with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Her heels clicked on the pavement, steady and sure. "Mrs. Sterling, is it true your husband was arrested? Victoria, what happens to the company now? Did you know about the will?" She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She looked at the sea of microphones. "Mr. Sterling is currently assisting the authorities with an investigation into corporate theft," Victoria said, her voice clear and devoid of trembling. "As for Sterling Logistics, it is business as usual. I am the daughter of William Sterling. I know how to steer this ship." She didn't wait for follow-up questions. She stepped into the waiting black sedan. "Where to, Mrs. Sterling?" the driver asked. It was Jenkins, her father's old driver. He looked at her in the rearview mirror, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "To the office, Jenkins," Victoria said. "I have a board meeting to convene." The headquarters of Sterling Logistics was a glass and steel monolith in the financial district. When Patrick ran the place, the atmosphere was one of fear. Employees kept their heads down. Conversation stopped when he entered a room. When Victoria walked through the revolving doors, the lobby went silent. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of anticipation. She walked straight to the elevator, bypassing the security desk that Patrick had installed to keep riffraff, meaning her, out of the executive suites without an appointment. She pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator doors opened to the executive suite. The receptionist, a young woman named Clara, who Patrick had often reduced to tears over coffee orders, looked up. Her eyes went wide. "Mrs. Sterling," Clara gasped. We heard the news. Is Mr. Sterling coming back?" "No, Clara," Victoria said, walking past the desk toward the CEO's office. "He isn't. Please call the forensic accounting team and the head of IT. I want them in my office in 10 minutes. And call a locksmith. I need the locks changed on the executive washroom and the private safe." "Yes, ma'am," Clara said, grabbing the phone with enthusiasm. Victoria pushed open the double doors to Patrick's office. It smelled of his expensive cologne and stale cigar smoke. She walked to the window, looking out over the city. On the massive oak desk, her father's desk, sat a framed photo of Patrick shaking hands with a senator. Victoria picked it up. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into the wastebasket. A knock at the door interrupted her. "Come in." 3 men and a woman entered. They looked nervous. One was Arthur Pendergast, the company's CFO. He had been Patrick's right-hand man, always nodding at Patrick's schemes. "Victoria," Arthur said, sweating. We were just discussing the situation. It's a tragedy. If there is anything I can do to help smooth the transition." Victoria turned around. She didn't offer him a seat. "You signed off on the bonuses, Arthur," she said. It wasn't a question. Arthur paled. Patrick authorized them. I was just following orders." "You are the chief financial officer," Victoria said, walking around the desk to sit in the high-backed leather chair. "Your job is to protect the company's assets, not to rubber stamp the looting of them." She picked up a file on the desk. "My father's will triggered a forensic audit immediately upon the filing of divorce papers. That audit started digitally 2 hours ago. My team tells me you authorized 3 transfers to consulting firms in the Cayman Islands last week." "Those were legitimate expenses," Arthur protested, his voice cracking. "We shall see," Victoria said. "Security is waiting for you in the hallway, Arthur. You are suspended pending the investigation. Leave your badge on the table." Arthur stared at her. He looked for the weak, submissive woman he had known for 5 years. He didn't find her. He placed his badge on the mahogany surface and walked out. His shoulders slumped. The other 3 executives stood straighter. "Now," Victoria said to the remaining team, "we have $52 million missing. We know where it went. We know who has it. I want to know exactly how we get it back." The head of IT, a sharp woman named Sarah, stepped forward. "Mrs. Sterling, we've been tracking the digital footprint of the transfers. Patrick wasn't very tech-savvy. He used company devices to access the offshore accounts. We have the keystrokes. We have the passwords." "But," Sarah hesitated, "there's a problem. The money isn't in the Caymans anymore. It was moved an hour ago." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Tiffany." "Yes," Sarah said. "She moved it. But she made a mistake. She transferred it to a private bank in Zurich, probably thinking it was safer. But because the original funds were flagged as stolen corporate assets by the court order this morning, the SWIFT code triggered an Interpol alert." Victoria leaned forward. "So we know where she is?" "We don't just know where the money is," Sarah said, tapping her tablet. She logged into the bank account from a specific IP address 10 minutes ago. She's not in the Maldives. She's at the Blackwood Hotel, here in the city. She's waiting for her connecting flight. Victoria stood up. "Get the car." The Blackwood Hotel was the kind of place where coffee cost $20, and the staff were trained to be invisible. It was the perfect place for someone like Tiffany Rose to hide in plain sight while waiting for a first-class ticket to a non-extradition country. Tiffany sat in the lounge, sipping a martini. She wore oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf wrapped around her head, channeling a 1950s movie star. She checked her phone. The transfer to the Swiss account showed pending. "Come on," she whispered, tapping the screen with a manicured nail. "Clear, you stupid thing." She wasn't worried about Patrick. He was an idiot. She had known the marriage was imploding for months. She had coached him on how to hide the money, all while ensuring her name was the secondary signatory. She had played the loving mistress perfectly, feeding his ego while he fed her bank account. She took a sip of her drink. Once the money cleared, she would be on a flight to Brazil. She spoke Portuguese. She would disappear. A shadow fell over her table. "Waiting for someone?" a voice asked. Tiffany jumped. She looked up. Standing there was not a waiter, but a tall woman in a grey dress. It took Tiffany a moment to recognize her without the tear-streaked face she had seen in tabloid photos. "Victoria," Tiffany sneered, recovering her composure quickly. She didn't stand up. "I'd offer you a drink, but I hear you're on a budget now." Victoria pulled out the chair opposite Tiffany and sat down. She didn't look angry. She looked incredibly calm. You really should read the news, Tiffany, Victoria said. Patrick is in jail. He's facing 15 to 20 years for grand larceny and fraud. Tiffany shrugged, taking another sip. Sad for him. But that has nothing to do with me. I'm just a private citizen, enjoying a cocktail. You're a co-conspirator, Victoria corrected. And you're currently attempting to launder stolen funds through a Swiss bank. Tiffany laughed. It was a harsh, brittle sound. You can't prove that. Patrick gave me gifts. It's not a crime to accept gifts. It is when the giver didn't own the money, Victoria said. She placed her phone on the table. My father was a paranoid man, Tiffany. He didn't just track Patrick. He tracked the money. Every single dollar that left the company accounts was tagged with a digital marker. A tracer? Tiffany's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? Victoria nodded toward the hotel entrance. Tiffany turned her head. 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a sharp suit, clearly a detective, were walking through the lobby. They weren't looking around aimlessly. They were looking at the lounge. Tiffany stood up, grabbing her Hermes bag. I have to go. Sit down, Victoria said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of an anchor. You can't keep me here, Tiffany hissed. I don't need to, Victoria said. Check your phone, the transfer. Tiffany frantically unlocked her phone. She opened the banking app. Status: denied. Account frozen. Contact law enforcement. Tiffany stared at the screen. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup looking like a mask. What did you do? She whispered. I didn't do anything, Victoria said. You did it to yourself. You tried to move $52 million that was currently under a federal freezing order. You just flagged yourself to every banking authority in the Western Hemisphere. The officers arrived at the table. The detective stepped forward. Tiffany Rose? Tiffany looked at the detective, then at Victoria. Her eyes filled with panic. I didn't steal it! Patrick gave it to me! He told me it was his! You can explain that to the judge, the detective said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Ms. Rose, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and receipt of stolen property. No! Tiffany screamed as the officer grabbed her wrists. The lounge went silent. Guests stared. The carefully cultivated image of the glamorous heiress shattered. Victoria, tell them! Tell them it was Patrick. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. Victoria watched as the cuffs clicked shut. She stood up slowly. You already told me everything I needed to know, Victoria said. You told me my husband was a fool, and you proved that you are one too. As they dragged Tiffany away, kicking and screaming in her designer heels, Victoria didn't smirk. She didn't laugh. She just watched until they were out the door. Then she turned to the waiter who was hovering nearby, looking terrified. Check, please, she said. 6 months later, the seasons had changed in the city. The oppressive heat that had suffocated the streets on the day the divorce papers were signed had given way to a biting November chill. The wind whipped through the canyons of the financial district, stripping the trees bare, mirroring the dismantling of the sterling facade. Inside the Superior Court, however, the temperature ran high. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. It wasn't just the press anymore, it was the public. The Sterling trap had become a national sensation, a case study in law schools and a topic of endless debate on morning talk shows. People lined the back walls, standing shoulder to shoulder, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fallen tycoon. Victoria Sterling sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution's table. She did not slouch. She did not hide behind dark glasses. She wore a tailored suit of charcoal wool, a sharp contrast to the soft, shapeless dresses she had worn during her marriage. Her hands rested calmly on her knees. Beside her sat the new acting legal counsel for Sterling Logistics, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Pike, who checked her watch with clinical precision. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Judge Holloway emerged from his chambers. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, perhaps wearied by the sheer volume of motions, counter-motions, and desperate pleas filed by the defense. He took his seat, the leather chair creaking under the weight of the moment. "Be seated," Holloway commanded. "Docket number 49-9B, the People versus Patrick J. Sterling. We are here for sentencing." The side door opened. The room held its breath. Patrick Sterling entered. The transformation was grotesque. The man who walked into the courtroom in shackles bore little resemblance to the titan of industry who had sneered at his wife half a year ago. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin, once tanned from weekends in the Hamptons, was pasty and grey, the colour of wet newsprint. His hair, stripped of expensive dyes and styling products, showed patches of white and thinned aggressively at the crown. He wore the standard-issue orange jumpsuit, which hung off his frame like a sack. He shuffled to the defense table, his chains rattling, a sound that the microphones picked up and amplified throughout the silent room. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the cameras. And he certainly did not look at Victoria. His attorney, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Gorski, a man with frayed cuffs and a tired expression, patted Patrick on the shoulder. It was a gesture devoid of warmth, merely procedural. "Your Honor." District Attorney Harrison Cole stood up. Cole was a man who built his career on burying white-collar criminals, and he looked at Patrick like a wolf looks at a wounded deer. "The people are ready to proceed with sentencing recommendations." "Proceed," Judge Holloway said. Cole walked to the center of the room. He didn't use notes. He pointed a finger at Patrick. 6 months ago, Patrick Sterling attempted to commit the perfect crime, Cole began, his voice booming. He viewed the legal dissolution of his marriage not as a tragedy, but as a heist. He conspired with his mistress, Tiffany Rose, to siphon $52 million from a company that employs 4,000 people. He didn't just steal money, Your Honor. He stole stability. He stole trust. And he did it with a smirk. Cole turned to the jury box, which was empty now, as the guilt had already been established by plea. He spoke to the judge, but he performed for the room. "The defense will tell you that Mr. Sterling is a first-time offender. They will tell you he was under emotional duress, but the evidence tells a different story. We have the logs." Cole signaled to the clerk, who projected an image onto the large screen. It was a transcript of a text message exchange recovered from a burner phone found in Tiffany Rose's carry-on luggage. Date: May 14th, 2 days before the divorce signing. Sender: Patrick S. Recipient: T. Rose. Message: "The mouse is in the trap. She's crying over the papers right now. I'll sign on Tuesday, and by dinner, we'll be drinking Bollinger in the air. The old man's ghost can't touch us." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Victoria stared at the screen. She remembered that day. She remembered crying in the kitchen while Patrick pretended to be at the gym. He had been texting his lover, mocking her grief. "The mouse," Cole said, letting the word hang in the air, was his wife of 5 years. The trap was his marriage. But as we know, the real trap was waiting for him. Cole turned back to the bench. Ms. Rose has already been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. She provided full cooperation. She testified that Patrick Sterling was the architect of the entire scheme. He used her name to hide the assets because he was too cowardly to put his own name on the illegal accounts. He set her up as the fall guy, just as he tried to victimize his wife. Patrick flinched. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The state requests the maximum sentence, Cole concluded. 20 years. No parole. To send a message that the boardroom is not above the law. It was Mr. Gorski's turn. He stood up slowly, knowing he was fighting a losing battle. Your Honor, Gorski said, his voice raspy. My client is a broken man. He has lost his reputation, his fortune, and his freedom. He has been vilified in the press. He admits his wrongdoing. But 20 years? That is a sentence for murderers. Mr. Sterling is a businessman who made a terrible, greedy mistake. We ask for leniency. We ask for 5 years. Judge Holloway took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked down at Patrick. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? The room went deadly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Patrick slowly stood up. He trembled. He looked small. He cleared his throat, but no sound came out. He tried again. Patrick croaked. He finally lifted his head. He looked for a friendly face in the crowd and found none. He looked at Victoria. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't hate. It wasn't pity. It was indifference. She looked at him as if he were a stranger she had passed on the subway. I just wanted to win, Patrick whispered into the microphone. I thought that's what business was. Winning. Business? Judge Holloway interrupted, his voice sharp. Is the exchange of goods and services for value. What you did was predation. You treated people like assets to be liquidated. The judge picked up a stack of papers, the victim impact statements. I have a letter here from a warehouse manager in Ohio, the judge read. He writes that because of the liquidity crisis you caused by draining the operating accounts, his overtime pay was frozen for 3 months. He almost lost his home. He has 3 children. The judge picked up another. I have a letter from your former administrative assistant. She writes that you threw a stapler at her head because her coffee was lukewarm. She writes that she was afraid to come to work every single day. Patrick looked down at the table again. You didn't just steal money, Mr. Sterling, the judge said. You stole dignity. And unlike money, dignity cannot be paid back via wire transfer. Judge Holloway put the papers down. He clasped his hands. Patrick Sterling, on the count of grand larceny in the 1st degree, I sentence you to 15 years in the state penitentiary. Patrick's knees buckled. Gorski grabbed his elbow to steady him. On the count of securities fraud, the judge continued, relentless, I sentence you to 10 years to be served concurrently. And, the judge paused, leaning forward, regarding the civil restitution to the estate of William Sterling, the court orders the liquidation of all personal assets, the villa in Tuscany, the apartment on Park Avenue, the cars, the watches, everything. You will enter prison with exactly what you have on your back. The gavel rose. This court is adjourned. Bang! The sound was final. The spell broke. The gallery erupted into noise. Reporters shouted questions. The bailiffs moved in, grabbing Patrick by the arms. Victoria! Patrick screamed suddenly, his composure shattering completely. He twisted in the bailiff's grip, turning toward her. Victoria, I'm sorry. Please, don't let them take me. Call the governor. You have the connections. Victoria! Victoria didn't flinch. She stood up smoothly, smoothing the fabric of her skirt. She turned her back on him. Take him away, the head bailiff ordered. They dragged Patrick through the side door. His screams of, I'm sorry, echoed in the hallway for a moment before the heavy steel door slammed shut, cutting him off forever. Victoria walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The reporters parted like the Red Sea, sensing that shouting questions at her right now would be a mistake. Near the exit, a man in a rumpled suit leaned against the wall. It was Nathaniel Reed, Patrick's former shark of a lawyer. He looked deflated. His reputation had been shredded by his association with the case, and while he had avoided jail time by turning state's witness, his career at the top firms was over. He stepped into Victoria's path. "Mrs. Sterling," Nathaniel said. He held his hat in his hands. Victoria stopped. She looked him up and down. "Mr. Reed." I wanted to congratulate you," Nathaniel stammered. "Justice was served." "Justice is a byproduct, Mr. Reed," Victoria said coolly. "My father was interested in results." "I wanted you to know," Nathaniel continued, looking at his shoes, "that I told him not to sign. In the beginning, I told him the prenup was enough. But he was so arrogant. He wanted the shares. He wanted to humiliate you." "I know," Victoria said. "He needed to feel superior. It was his only fuel." "You're a lot like your father," Nathaniel noted, a mix of fear and admiration in his eyes. "I didn't see it before. None of us did." "That," Victoria said, stepping around him, "was the point." She walked out into the cold November air. Jenkins, her faithful driver, was waiting by the curb with the door of the Bentley open. "To the office, ma'am?" Jenkins asked. "Yes, Jenkins," Victoria said, sliding into the leather seat. "We have a board meeting to finish." The boardroom at Sterling Logistics was a cavernous space dominated by a long table of polished black granite. For years, Victoria had been excluded from this room. When she was allowed in, she was made to sit in the corner, a silent observer, while Patrick and his cronies laughed and drank scotch. Today, she sat at the head of the table. The room was full. The board of directors, 12 men and women who had watched the company nearly collapse under Patrick's looting, sat in silence. They looked at Victoria with a mixture of apprehension and respect. "Let's come to order," Victoria said. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried to the far end of the room without effort. "First item on the agenda," she said, looking at a file in front of her. "The resignation of board member Arthur Pendergast." A heavy-set man halfway down the table turned purple. "Now see here, Victoria, Mrs. Sterling. I didn't resign. I was largely unaware of Patrick's specific activities." "Ignorance is not a defense, Arthur," Victoria said. "It is a liability. You were the chairman of the audit committee. You missed $52 million leaving the building. Either you were complicit or you were incompetent. Which one would you like me to put in the press release?" Arthur opened his mouth, then closed it. He stood up, gathered his papers, and walked out of the room. "Accepted," Victoria said to the closing door. She turned her gaze to the rest of them. "My father built this company on logistics," she said, "moving things from point A to point B efficiently. Patrick treated this company like a casino. That ends today." She tapped a button on the console. A projection appeared on the wall. It was a graph showing a steep decline, followed by a sharp, jagged upward spike in the last 2 months. "Since I took over as interim CEO," Victoria said, "we have clawed back 80% of the stolen assets through the courts. We have liquidated Patrick's holdings. But more importantly, we have returned to our roots." She looked at Morgan, the new head of IT, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes who sat to her right. "Morgan, update us on the tracking software." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling," Morgan said confidently. "We've implemented the William Protocol system-wide. It uses the same algorithm your father used to catch Patrick. Every penny is tracked in real time. Transparency is at 100%. "Good," Victoria said. She looked back at the board. "I am not my husband. I do not want yachts. I do not want fame. I want Sterling Logistics to be the gold standard. If you are with me, we have a lot of work to do. If you aren't, the door Arthur just used is still unlocked." Silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then, a board member at the end of the table, A stern woman named Catherine, who had never smiled at Patrick, nodded. "I move to confirm Victoria Sterling as permanent CEO," Catherine said. "Seconded," another voice rang out immediately. "All in favour?" Catherine asked. Every hand in the room went up. Victoria didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply nodded. Motion carried. Now, let's talk about the Asian distribution negotiation. I reviewed the contract last night, and I found 3 clauses we need to rewrite. 2 hours later, as the sun began to dip below the skyline, painting the city in hues of violet and bruised orange, Victoria stood alone in the cemetery. It was quiet here. The noise of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the shouting of the stock floor, was muffled by the rolling hills and the ancient oak trees. She walked the familiar path to the family plot. It was a large, enclosed area, surrounded by a low stone wall. She stopped in front of the large marble headstone. William Arthur, Sterling, 1950. 2023. He saw what others missed. Victoria stood there for a long time. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, but she didn't feel it. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a lightness she hadn't experienced since she was a child. She reached into her purse and pulled out a copy of the final court judgment. It was stamped, "Case closed." She knelt down and placed the paper on the grave, anchoring it with a small, smooth stone. "You knew," she whispered to the grass. "You always knew." She traced the letters of his name with her gloved finger. "I was so angry with you when you died," she admitted softly. "I thought you left me alone with him. I thought you didn't care enough to warn me." A dry leaf skittered across the stone. "But you did warn me," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You just knew I wouldn't listen. Not then. I was too in love with the idea of being loved. I had to see it for myself. I had to feel the knife in my back to understand who was holding the handle." She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees. She looked at the empty space beside her father's grave, the spot reserved for her mother, and eventually for her. "The trap worked, Dad," she said. "He's gone. The money is back. The company is safe." She looked up at the sky. The first stars were appearing. "But the best part wasn't the money," Victoria said. "The best part was reading that clause, the one where you said you believed I could handle it. You didn't leave the company to a trust fund. You didn't leave it to a board of trustees. You left the mechanism to me. You bet on me." She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp air. She adjusted her coat, buttoning it against the chill. "I won't let you down," she promised. She turned to leave. As she walked toward the wrought iron gates, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. It was a text from Jenkins. "Mom, the press is gathered at the main gate. Do you want me to take the back exit?" Victoria stopped. She looked at the phone. She looked at the gate ahead. She could see the flashes of the cameras in the distance, a swarm of hungry lights waiting for a comment, for a soundbite, for a glimpse of the poor heiress. She typed her reply. "No, Jenkins. Pull around to the front. I have nothing to hide." She put the phone away. She lifted her chin. She walked toward the lights, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. She wasn't the victim anymore. She wasn't the wife. She wasn't even just the daughter. She was Victoria Sterling, and she had an empire to run. The downfall of Patrick Sterling wasn't just a divorce case. It was a masterclass in karma. He thought he was signing a paper to get rid of his wife, but he was actually signing his own confession. William Sterling's Sterling trap proves that even from the grave, a father's protection can be the most dangerous weapon of all. Victoria didn't just survive the betrayal, she turned it into her empire. It makes you wonder, How many other secrets are hidden in the fine print of the people we think we know? If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, do you think 15 years was enough for Patrick, or did he deserve more? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.